Today is Monday, March 30th, 2015, and this is episode 111 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hey, Jerry. How you doing, man?
Doing awesome. Thank you. How are you?
I am good. It's Monday, so...
Yeah. So, by the way, the thoughts and opinions we express on this podcast are ours and do not represent those of our employer.
That's very true. Past, present, or future.
Exactly.
However, if you like our thoughts and are willing to pay us, what's our bidding up to now? $250?
$250, that's right.
Okay. We may adopt your opinions.
That's true.
We can be bought.
Yeah. Everything has a price. So the High Tech Crime Investigation Association, it has their annual meetup down in Orlando from August 30th through September 2nd of this year. And we actually are able to give away a ticket. And to enter the drawing for the ticket, we would like for you to mention the podcast on Twitter. So use our Twitter handle at DefensiveSec. You can enter once per day. At the end of April, we will tally up the results. And by the way, that's April 2015 for those of you listening much, much later.
It's an important note.
That's right.
If this is 2018, you're SOL. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. We will tally up the results at the end of April, and we will pick randomly and then announce the winner in May. But, one thing we would ask you is, don't enter unless you're really intending to go, right? Because This is a $600 ticket. This is non-trivial. And this does not include any lodging or airfare, bus fare, train fare, hobo fare, however you choose to travel. Right.
You got to get there on your own.
That's right. That's right. So again, it is August 30th through September 2nd of 2015 in Orlando.
That's for the conference.
That's for the conference.
And the contest goes...
April 1st through April 30th.
Okay. Also, if you don't win, but you want to go... our listeners get a discount.
10% off the $595 price tag, unless, by the way, you're a member, and then you think it's considerably cheaper. But we get 10% off if you use the code Defensive Security.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
And in the interest of full disclosure, they're not paying us to say this. They have offered us free tickets. So they're just fans of the show, and we like good knowledge building. So... we agreed to mention them on the show, and we may be there. We haven't quite figured that out yet, but just in the interest of full disclosure, that's the story for any sort of remuneration that may be.
I'm intending to be there. You don't have to ask me twice to go to Orlando.
Is the family going with you?
Twist my arm. Yes.
Yeah.
Family will be going.
I got to figure it out. I got a lot of stuff going on in September, August timeframe. Though upside, I do have full clearance and thumbs up from work to go to DerbyCon. So I'm confirmed for DerbyCon.
Awesome. I have my tickets in my room. I'm locked and loaded.
Awesome. So you're staying in the condo hotel again?
I am.
Okay.
I am.
I might go to the Marriott for the overflow. I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll see. I'm also a Marriott. I like Marriott points. I'm a Marriott fan. Anyway, all that being said, as soon as mainline tickets go on sale, what is it, May 1?
I believe that's right, yes. You can go to derbycon.com and get your tickets, make your reservations. I do believe it is after the 1st of May, though.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, DerbyCon's in Louisville, Kentucky, in late September.
Yep, and we will be there. And we had just an awesome time last year, hitting the bar and watching some talks.
Yeah, we may have to do something a little more logistically planful for a listener meetup this time, though.
I'm thinking there may be more than 10 this time.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, that's awesome. That's a great problem to have. I just think trying to mingle in with everybody else was fun, but a challenge. Maybe we'll have to find a find a spot. So maybe we'll have to do something official and get some, kind of pseudo RSVPs out there so we can get a count and do a listener night or something. And I don't know. That'd be fun.
I like it.
So, anywho, we're just killing airtime now, aren't we?
That's right. One more thing to kill airtime with is we actually have started a Patreon campaign.
Ah, yes. Thank you. I'd forgotten about that.
And we've actually...
For those, by the way, I'd never heard of it before, so maybe we should define what Patreon is.
So patreon.com, Patreon.com is a website where you can effectively sponsor content that you like, right? So I signed up the podcast, and we've already got a couple of donors. And by the way, we greatly appreciate those of you who have already donated. And just for context, right? I personally have spent probably getting up to $1,500 to $2,000 of my own money, not including time spent producing this podcast. And I get sometimes I get the evil eye from my wife. So it would be very helpful to us. Every now and then I've got a piece of equipment that dies and I need to replace it. So. It's not free to publish this podcast. I do it because I love it. I believe in the mission, and I'm going to keep doing it whether you donate or not. But if you so choose, I would greatly appreciate it. And by the way, you can donate at patreon.com/defensivesec.
We've joked about this, but we are serious. We really don't want to take sponsors. We really don't. We have had opportunities. We've had folks ask us about it. We like being completely unbiased. We like being able to say what we honestly believe. So that is important to us. And, nobody's trying to get rich off a podcast, that's for sure. But I personally feel that as soon as you take a sponsor, especially, let me put it this way, a sponsor that's in a vendor, if you will, or a service provider, aside from like a broad educational provider, like a conference, it influences your commentary.
Absolutely.
And we, at least I personally, don't want those kind of golden handcuffs. So, just so in the interest of transparency, I've also offered to chip in to help Jerry with costs. And, he turns his nose up at me. My money's not good enough for him.
Oh,
that's not true. I helped on some swag.
You did.
I'll split ongoing swag with you. I told you anytime I'll kick in. I'll go halvesies with you.
I know. I'm not complaining.
Probably nobody cares about this part of the conversation. We're just
everybody, fast forward.
Yeah, we're turning to morning zoo, aren't we?
Yeah. Speaking of that, so let's go ahead and get into our discussion topics. The first thing I had on the docket for tonight is actually not a story, but something you wanted to talk about, which is the upside and downside of firewall management and where it belongs in the organization. So, you want to tee it up?
Yeah, this is such an old debate, but I was talking to a good buddy, and he spun this back up. Man, I was like, man, we have never really talked about it on the show. And so, the concept fundamentally is, you've got firewalls in your organization, whether they be mainline firewalls, whether they be routers with ECLs, whatnot, and who should do the administration of those devices. And we'll leave managed service providers out of the picture for a moment. And, it's a religious debate amongst some, whether it should be the networking team or it should be the security operations team or the security team. And it really depends on the organization, how they're split up, how they're organized. But let's say, for the sake of conversation, you've got a mainline network team, you've got a mainline security team. Who should run the firewalls? And the debate that is often presented is the firewall is a router, typically, and it is in core critical function path, and the networking team is paid to keep the network up and running, so they should be the guys running the firewalls because it's critical networking gear. The flip side of that debate is, but the networking team is paid to keep the network up and running, so they're going to default to performance and uptime over security. So they may not be as willing or as able to do anything that might impact production because they are held accountable to uptime and production and throughput, whereas the security team may be more willing to perhaps impact production traffic for the sake of security.
So where do you come out on that?
I believe the firewall is a security device first. And the security team should own the firewalls and the firewall policy because it is your key choke point for many, many things. It, one, makes sure that you've got the right folks understanding what the implication of rules being put in place mean and do. They're in the right position to push back when somebody says, I need all high ports opened between this server and this server. Wait a second, why? Yeah, that's not a good plan. I'm going to say this with as much respect as I can muster, because I started as a firewall guy. I spent most of my career as a firewall guy. And it's a great skill set to have. However, being a firewall admin, if that is the totality of your skill set, does not a security guy make you. Because you know how to admin a firewall well, doesn't necessarily mean you have the skill set to understand the implication from a risk and availability and risk tolerance and risk mitigation, all this other stuff, of what those rules actually mean in context of the company's risk tolerance. You very well could, but that is a separate skill set you have to develop outside of the firewall administration skill set. Right? Knowing how to put a rule into whatever vendor, whether it be Check Point, Juniper, Palo Alto, Cisco, knowing how to construct and put in a rule to get traffic to flow is different than knowing whether or not that traffic should flow. And this is a common mistake firewall admins make if they're from the network side of the house, typically. And by the way, same problem with managed service providers. Managed service providers have the exact same fundamental flaw. They're just there to put the rules in you tell them to put in. They don't know if it's a good rule or bad rule. So, in my mind, if the security team owns the firewalls, it gives them a checkpoint to know what's going on, control the launch of applications, control the launch of all sorts of stuff, because they're the ones who have to make a change, typically, if you've got a tight rule base, before something can launch. They're also much more interested typically in securing outbound traffic than networking guys. These are generalities, right? There's always exceptions to this rule. But I think it's a security device. It should be managed by a security team. What do you think?
I guess I'm maybe a little less hardcore on that one. To me, it seems like the security people ought to own the rule base. But I think that's a different thing than necessarily kind of quote owning the firewall. I think clearly the security staff should be in some way, shape, or form involved in approving rule changes. But I can certainly see the argument to be made about availability. And every organization is going to be a little bit different in what they really care about, because every organization's kind of got to figure out where they live on the continuum between availability and security. But in my experience, it's unfortunately always been a little far closer to the availability end of the spectrum. And so often looking for those opportunities for middle ground, right? So that'd be my, if I, in an ideal world, that's how I would probably structure it if it made sense. And, the downside to that is it just adds complexity to the whole operation. And so it might not work real well in a smaller...
What adds complexity?
Splitting responsibility like that.
So the networking team owns the OS level, the routing level.
Yeah, maybe the physical...
The appliance level.
The physical piece of hardware.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And the security team owns the rule base. Now there's a question to be said or asked, well, who physically implements the rule changes? And I could go either way. It really depends on the maturity of the organization. If you can set it up so that the firewall people are able to make the rule changes and they will not do it without the approval of the security team, well, there you go.
Well, that's where push comes to shove, right? So if the security team says no and the network team wants to do it, they've got a production rollout to do, or they got some VP standing over their shoulder.
Yeah, I mean it comes down to discipline, right? So, if that's your concern and you feel like that is the case, then I agree with you.
Well, the other topic that came up at lunch when I was talking to my buddy about this was, what about routers? Should they be security devices? Should they have ACLs? Or should you handle that stuff on a true firewall?
Oof. Wait, that depends so much on your environment, though.
I know, but so the context of this conversation that I was having was, when the fundamental is who runs your security. Is it your networking team or is it your security team? Was kind of the thing. And network guys are very, very comfortable with doing ACLs on routers, and especially in Cisco shops where they've kind of drunk the Cisco Kool-Aid. Not saying that's a bad thing, but Cisco is a bit of a cult. We all know that. And he was grousing that there was a lot of ACLs being thrown out on routers that could be put on firewalls that are right next to the routers.
Mm.
And, he was saying it makes, for a security standpoint guy, a lot tougher to understand what's going on. ACLs, and I agree with him, I don't think ACLs are as strong from a security standpoint as a true firewall.
Okay. I get what you're saying now. My view is, I would not implement router ACLs in lieu of firewall rules. I think they could be complementary, because sometimes it would make sense from a performance standpoint, or there's potentially a number of different reasons why you would want to do that. But I wouldn't, I would also implement the same kinds of rules in your firewall.
Yeah.
As a backstop. And they should never hit, but
I've always had the opinion, and I can't really back this up scientifically, but a firewall rule and an ACL on a Cisco router of the exact same traffic, the firewall is tougher to subvert than the router with the ACL.
Yeah, that's
modern
fair.
Firewall. In general.
That's fair.
I don't think of a router ACL as as strong a security as a firewall with a rule.
Well, I think it depends on exactly what you're trying to do. What the nature of your rule is. If it's a very simple, drop a particular block of traffic, I think you can probably do that pretty well in a router ACL.
You can. The complexity there is now you've got two different enforcement points that are logging into two different spots.
Yep.
Two different places to audit, two different places to troubleshoot. It seems messier to me.
Yeah, that's fair.
I can tell you don't have a very strong opinion on this topic.
Not particularly, but I do think you bring up a good point in that if you have a kind of a segregated or distribution enforcement point, it's difficult to piece it all together.
Right.
But I guess in the environments I've recently been in, it's all distributed anyway. So, I don't see a lot of benefit in that. But I think in a smaller setting, that certainly makes a lot of sense. I'll go with you there.
All right. Anyway, just a topic.
Yep.
We haven't really gone off on any sort of topics lately, so it was just one that came up recently in a lunch meeting that I thought I'd throw at you and see what you thought.
Sure.
I'm a bit of a purist, but then again, I've done both. I've done firewall admin, I've done network admin, and I like using the right tool for the right job. And it's sort of like UTM firewalls. I'm not a big fan of the add-on AV or the add-on web filtering. I think they're okay, but they're not great. Much like I don't think ACLs and routers, they're okay, but they're not great. They're not the core competency of the product.
Right. No, I'm with you there. All right, so our next topic is this actually started with a Twitter conversation I was having with a couple of people, and I think it was spurred by a recent publication by the PCI Council, which pointed out or I guess it was, let's see, what was the name of the document? It's related to penetration testing. So,
their penetration guidance?
Implementation
guidance?
supplement penetration testing guidance, right? And so the topic of conversation was, should we even allow, or should the PCI Council or PCI DSS even allow for the concept of segmentation and drawing boundaries around your CDE versus considering the entire network and scope? And
wow,
yeah, on the one hand, there's a really good argument to be made why it's a bad idea, because we see time and time again where that concept fails. But I will tell you, after having read this guidance, that's what this guidance is intended to address.
Right, to test the segmentation controls.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So historically, the problem has been that, not everyone, but I would say the average organization going through a PCI audit does their darndest to limit the scope of what's being tested. And they do it for lots of different reasons, costs and on and on. But the problem is, again, this comes down to incentives, right? The problem is that you may not fully understand all of the ways into the CDE. And so we end up with things like Target, where, they, presumably passed their PCI audit and thought they had the right level of segmentation in place, but obviously they didn't. And so on the one hand, the question is, well, is it reasonable to even allow a Target? I'm just picking on them, not intending to, right? But should Target be able to draw a circle around what they want to have in scope for their PCI exam, or should it be everything? And that's a good question, but on the other side, particularly in these larger organizations, I think there's a lot of peril in putting too much in scope. Because you would never get done.
Well, yeah, let's take the Target example. If everything were in scope, does that include every vendor network that connects into their environment?
Yeah, and I mean, at some point you have to stop, right? Where do you stop? What? there's always a demarcation point. I
think in my mind, this is a failure to test the control, not a failure of the control.
Agreed.
I am 100% for segmentation, and I'm not. If I've got a PCI environment and I've got cardholder data environment, I don't want Susie's secretary's laptop in Denver to be included in that. That makes no sense to me, especially if she has zero way of connecting. Now, if we're not doing a good job of truly segmenting our cardholder data environments, and we're half-assing that, that's the problem.
And I think that is the very concern, is that, historically the royal we have been half-assing this.
And so this comes back on frankly, the QSAs a bit it's really, the bigger your scope, the more expensive the audit is. So it behooves an organization to segment properly. And I think you could drive that behavior from a QSA saying, sorry, you've got a firewall there, but you've got an any except rule in place. That's not a segmentation. So guess what? All this other stuff is in scope.
Right.
And drive that behavior from a cost perspective. It's really expensive. Now, the problem is, if you're already up and running, how do you re-architect into a properly segmented environment is probably non-trivial. But if you're net new, right? If for whatever reason you're building a brand new environment, by God, segment it. If possible, give it its own internet connectivity, give it its own routers, give it its own switches, completely separate that crap.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, don't get fancy with VMware, right? Keep that shit separate. Your life is going to be so much easier. So, kind of going off a little bit of rant here, but I in no way would agree with getting rid of segmentation. I think that is fraught with peril, and I think we would lose the forest for the trees. However, we do need to audit that segmentation and make sure it's properly done.
Yeah, I agree, and that's what this supplement from the PCI Council is intended to do. And it remains to be seen how well it will be implemented in practice. But the point of it is to have, as part of the assessment process, a consideration of all the different ways into the CDE, and anything that has the ability to get into the CDE is effectively becomes part of the CDE and needs to be tested accordingly.
Yeah.
And this penetration testing guidance also talks about, running the testing from the perspective of internal networks that are not on the CDE. Now it's not a perfect thing, right? Because there are some, they talk about, in really complicated environments, it might not be practical to run a test from every internal network. And so what they recommend is the QSA tries to bucketize the different kinds of networks and connectivity techniques and look for commonalities, and then test from a representative sample of each one of those kinds of connections. And
there's the problem.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a potential for
But I think
failure.
if security and enterprise architecture are doing their job properly, we wouldn't be half-assing this to begin with. Right? If we're relying on the QSA to catch it, we're missing stuff from the design and execution standpoint.
Oh, clearly.
Right,
And this is something that I fundamentally, and I've written about this in the past, that I just think in general, people, by people I mean IT architects, don't really understand how this crap can fail, how IT infrastructure can fail. And this is, I think, your point is very valid. We don't do a good job, and then we look to the QSA to, give us a rubber stamp or point us to where we're wrong.
And I mean this with all due respect to the PCI Council and QSAs, but if our security program is being driven purely by PCI, we have failed. We should be architecting this for best practices in security, not because we want to pass our PCI on it. That should be secondary to good security. Now, that's much easier said than done. But I've seen so many organizations that are chasing the bare minimum of getting through their PCI audit. If you have built properly from the ground up with security in mind, there's nothing revolutionary in PCI. It's all common sense.
That's right.
So, the problem is it's reconstructing the aircraft in flight. It's really difficult if you're already up and going. And it's dangerous, and it's fragile, and it's risky to make big changes on your production environment if your business is reliant upon that.
Yeah, but I think the average observer would say the requirement here isn't new. Maybe the understanding of your obligations relative to segmentation is new, but you should have already had this in place, right? This shouldn't require a big re-architecting.
Well, is this going back to PCI is not as powerful as we think it is?
I think so. I think so.
I mean, I see games played every day with, auditors. It's the tap dance. It's, we reported on a story not too long ago where people lose compliance very quickly after the audit's over. Yeah.
It's I used to work for the COO of a company, and used to call this kind of thing a kabuki dance. everybody has their roles. Everybody knows how it's going to turn out, and you just go through the motions.
Now, the flip side is we can't also be a slave to compliance. There are times when you might make a decision that is perhaps not ideally compliant.
Yeah.
You still have a business to run.
That's true.
and maybe you put a mitigating control in or something. I don't know. But, at the end of the day, you still need to not be driven by the QSA. If that's what's driving your security program, I think your leadership is weak in security.
Yeah, fair enough. So, we beat that one to death. So
yeah, we did.
So,
and please write in with your thoughts.
Yes.
Moving
on. Our last story comes from Ars Technica, and the title is GitHub Battles Largest DDoS in Site's History, Targeted at Anti-Censorship Tools.
This is crazy.
This is a really interesting, really interesting story. So this started last Thursday, March 26th, and they've been kind of DDoSed off the map. But what makes it crazy and unique is the way in which the DDoS is being carried out. So apparently what's happening is that visitors to Baidu, the search engine in China, and a couple of other pages who are not in China, if there's a visitor to one of those websites, what appears to be happening is that the Great Firewall of China is rewriting the web page a little bit and adding some JavaScript so that the user not only is requesting the web page of Baidu, but also is requesting a couple of URLs from GitHub. So basically everybody visiting, not in China, visiting Baidu is also hammering GitHub. And, and that makes it probably damn near impossible to use conventional DDoS mitigation techniques because it's, basically legitimate web browsers. Legitimate looking web browsing activity coming from probably all corners of the earth. So yeah, there's not a great story here. They appear to be continuing to wrestle with this.
I would love to know what kind of mitigations and defenses they're putting in place. I have a personal fascination with DDoS because it's a really tough problem. And this is one I think a lot on underestimate the threat of.
I agree. They've on their status page, they've, if you kind of read through the history, there's a, we got it back up and running. Everybody should be okay. And then, something's changed and we're down again. So they have been actively fighting this.
Yeah. And
nonstop.
Apparently the attackers keep changing tactics, keep changing source, which is what you have to do, right? I mean, DDoS is a constant evolving arms race.
Right.
It's a really, really tough problem to solve. And, one thing we've said before is that if your DDoS defense is a box sitting on your site at the end of your serial links, you're probably in trouble. Somebody can always play who's got a bigger pipe with you.
That's right.
So you almost always have to involve either a content delivery network or an ISP or something to really sustain against these big, big DDoSes. So I really hope that they publish their defenses. I don't know if they ever will, but I'd love to dig into what exactly they were fighting and how they were fighting it and what was effective and what wasn't, and share that with our listeners.
Well, maybe they will.
Yeah. But it's still ongoing. I believe it's still going on as we speak tonight.
Yep, that's that. Last I looked earlier today, it was still going on. So, although I have been able to get to the site, so apparently.
Oh yeah, that's because you're just participating in the attack.
Well, yeah, whatever.
And so we're not going to touch on the attribution aspect of this.
Well, of course of course it's China, right? So the two URLs at GitHub that are being hammered are the Grapefire, or github.com/Grapefire and github.com/CNNY Times.
So anti-censorship tools.
Yeah, so two anti-censorship tools. Two tool. I think Grapefire is intended to figure out what sites are being blocked by the firewall in China, and I don't recall what the CNNY Times does, but yeah, they're intended to be anti-censorship tools, and so the contemporary belief is that only China would really be able to or be in a position to modify traffic coming into their country, i.e. through Baidu. Baidu has said, it's not us, we're not doing it. So, of course everybody's pointing the finger at the Chinese government. Which, by the way, is not a crazy thing, because apparently, the U.S. it's come out that the U.S. was, in fact, responsible for DDoSing North Korea off the map after the Sony debacle.
Yeah, I think they used like an Apple II.
Yes.
Pretty sure.
They could be.
It was. I think there was just like a couple of syslog streams just took them down. It was.
Yeah, well, I mean, point is that it's not unprecedented that a rather mature government might do something like that. So.
Yeah, but let's be clear. At the same time, there's probably people in China who are the average everyday folk who agree with their government that we don't agree with. So just because it has to do with a government policy doesn't mean that it has to be the government doing it. There's all sorts of folks who would do things to support their government because they're, in their own minds, patriots and back their government up.
It's a fair point. It's a fair point.
So, it could be anonymous in China knocking this out. It doesn't have to be the government. I mean, it might be, but it doesn't have to be.
No. I suppose you're right.
I'm just saying.
Oh, whatever.
Yeah, we have this fascination with blaming nation state because we all want to be James Bond. And I'm like, come on, guys.
I think it lends. It adds an air of insurmountability, right?
Thank you, Mandiant.
Exactly. If you're being attacked by a nation state, you're totally in the victim space. Whereas if you're being attacked by organized crime, your controls aren't good enough. And
what if you're being attacked by some llamas?
Ooh, really fast llamas?
Maybe. I didn't want to specify too carefully. I just, in general.
Hey, that could be a big problem.
It could be.
All right.
We may have to revise our show logo and add a llama.
I agree. It could be like our mascot, right? The show mascot.
Could be. So, as a reminder, starting April 1st through the month of April, 1 entry per day, mention us on Twitter, and you can win a ticket.
That's
to
right.
The conference.
Worth $595.
It's true. But please be able to go, please.
That's right.
We don't want to waste a ticket.
That's right. All right. Well, that is our show for this evening. And with that, we'll talk again next week. If you like the show, give us some iTunes love. We love 5-star reviews. You can find the show on the web at www.defensivesecurity.org, where you will find the show notes to this week's stories and with links to this week's stories and back episodes and other fun stuff. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Callett on Twitter at Lurg. You can follow me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And with that, we'll talk again next week.
See you guys. Good night.
Take care. Bye.
We'll be honest with you. I only had time to glance at the stories.
Oh,
but
fuck's sake.
But I'm such a professional. I don't need to read them.
You have a very healthy opinion of yourself, Mr. Callett.
Using the Gartner hype cycle, I am now predicting, I'm making the call right now, we have reached peak zombie.
Really? So now we're going to head into the trough of disillusionment?
I believe so.
Huh.
I'm making that call. I could be wrong.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.